آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, the persecution of the people of Quraysh and the mushrikeen, the pagans there, the idolaters of the Muslimin started to turn up. And at first, it was mockery, it was insulting, it was passive-aggressive, sometimes very directly aggressive, but it wasn't very hands-on. But as things continued and they realized that the Prophet ﷺ's da'wah was there to stay and that he wasn't just going to go away, and the more miracles they witnessed from the Prophet ﷺ, the more aggressive they became. And so at first they started to put their hands on the outer ranks of the companions who didn't have anybody to protect them. They were either slaves or they were considered of unknown, unnotable tribes, or they were from abroad, right? Like, for instance, Suhaib al-Rumi. A lot of us have heard of Suhaib al-Rumi. He's referred to as Suhaib the Roman. He's not actually Roman. He's actually from Iraq. He's from the nobility of Iraq. But he was captured and sold into bondage and remained with the Romans for a very long time before he finally made his way to Mecca. And so once this happened, the Prophet ﷺ gave permission for a migration to take place to Al-Habasha. And this is Ethiopia, modern day. It was referred to as, it was an area, Ethiopia today, modern day Ethiopia. It was referred to as Abyssinia at the time. And that first migration was actually a very small amount of companions. In the most generous of estimates, it was about 13 men and 4 or 5 women. That was it. At most, they were under 20. And while they were there, the turmoil in Mecca continued to heat up more and more and more. But then something happened. Something happened, and rumors reached them in Abyssinia that all of the mushrikeen of Mecca had accepted Islam, and that Mecca was now a Muslim place, and this caused them to return from Abyssinia. And this is why we have 2 migrations. This was in the 5th year after the Prophet ﷺ was appointed as a messenger of Allah. In the 5th year, so 5 years after that night in Hira, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, something happened between the 5th and 6th year that caused them to return from Ethiopia. What is that? That is that the first chapter of the Quran was revealed that contained in it a sajda, what is referred to by the fuqaha as Sajda Tilawat, the sajda of the recitation. That is what we just heard, Surah Najm, as Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma mentioned, is the first chapter of the Quran to be revealed that contained in it a sajda. Now what happened? The Prophet ﷺ got sick. He became ill in Mecca. And for this time, there were about 14 or 15 days, as is mentioned in Sahih Muslim, where Jibreel did not come. And he was unable to make salah at night, so tahajjud. Remember, tahajjud for him at the beginning used to be obligatory, right? And so during this time, Jibreel didn't come, no new Quran had been revealed, because the way that it worked is anytime he received any new Quran, he would immediately convey it and recite it to the people in Quraysh. And so, how did the mushrikeen know he wasn't making salah at night? Because he didn't make salah and tahajjud inside of his house. He used to make it at the Kaaba at night. And the mushrikeen, they used to actually come out at night and they used to hide around the Kaaba like little boys and hide. Some of them would even hide between the Kaaba wall and the veil that they used to put on the Kaaba. And they used to stay there all night listening to him read the Quran because they wanted to hear what was the new verses of the Quran that were revealed. And one of them was Abu Jahl, and one of them was Abu Sufyan. And they used to actually bump into each other on their way home, and each one of them would lie about where they were. What are you doing out here? I don't know. What are you doing out here? I was, right? Because they didn't want to admit that they were out there listening to the Quran. So when he didn't show up for a couple of weeks, they noticed that. So they started to taunt him. Jamil, which could not be a more inappropriate nickname for her. She is Abu Lahab's wife. Jamil. She started to antagonize him, and she said to him, as is in Bukhari and Muslim, Ya Muhammad, inni ara shaytanaka qad tarakak. I see that your devil has finally left you alone. And so obviously this took a toll on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And finally, in some narrations, it's mentioned that the location where this incident happened was Hira. He went back to Hira, and he was very sad, and he was very, he had this burning desire to see Jibreel again. He was worried, that maybe he had inadvertently made a mistake. Maybe he had angered Allah somehow. Maybe he had fallen short of what was expected of him. And he looked up. And when he looked up into the eastern horizon, Jibreel alayhi salam came to him in his original form that he was created in. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam describes it as Jibreel had completely sealed off all of the visible sky and horizon that he could see. So he looked up from one end to the next. All above him was Jibreel in the original form that Allah created him. He had 600 wings. And he continued to come closer to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam until Allah described, فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى. He was so close that he was a couple meters away. They didn't use the word meter. Allah uses the word qaws, and a qaws in the Arabic language is roughly a bow, right, that you would shoot an arrow with. So he was a couple bow's lengths away or even closer than that. And as Mujahid said, he then recited to him Surah Al-Duha and Surah Al-Sharh very appropriately. Because remember, Eastern horizon, he hasn't come for so long. Spiritually, it was a very dark time for him. Jibreel finally comes in this original form, and the first thing he says to him is, Wad-Duha, I swear by the brightest part of the day, of the morning sun, Wal-Layli idha saja, and by the night when it is at its darkest. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Your Lord has neither abandoned you, nor has he hated you. And so he recited this chapter to him, and he recited to him the second chapter, which was the chapter of Isha. And that's why they come right after each other in the order of the Mus'haf. After this incident, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recounted this incident and the Isra and Mi'raj in Surah Najm. And when Surah Najm was revealed, it is 62 verses, very powerful verses. They were revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam all at once. And he was commanded to take this chapter and to go to the gathering of the elites of Quraysh in the afternoon time. They had like a tent, and there were multiple tents where each tribe's people would sit, but this one was reserved for the major tribes leaders. They would sit there in the around the Kaaba. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came there and he recited to them Surah An-Najm. Now what's interesting about this is, number one, the amount of courage that it would take to recite such a scathing surah, because this surah is not a very nice surah with regards to the mushrikeen's gods that they worshipped. This surah, Allah names their idols and insults them, right? It's a very scathing chapter of the Quran. But he came and he recited, and he recited verses about this incident with Jibreel and how Jibreel came to him, and descriptions of paradise. And then immediately in the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى. Now, having said that, what about Allat wal-Uzza and Manat? And Manat, the scholars of tafsir tell us, is the most insulted of these three in this verse. Because he said, and the third one, Manat, that other one, right? As if it's nothing. And these are the major gods of Quraysh that they used to worship. And in this gathering, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reaches the end of the chapter and he says, فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوا. So fall in prostration to Allah alone, and Allah alone worship. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made sujood. And the mushrikeen were so caught up in the moment and so taken by the power of the words in Surah An-Najm that they made sujood with him, all of them. Even Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab and everyone that was in that gathering. Ibn Mas'ud said even the jinn that were in that gathering made sujood. And then this started to spread. And the rumor went about that the mushrikeen became Muslim. So they came back from Abyssinia and they found that not only did they not become Muslim, but things are worse than they had ever been. Worse than they had ever been. Because the mushrikeen now, they felt so arrogant that they had gotten caught up in this moment that now they have to double down on their kufr, right? They have to make up for this slip that they had. And so then they made the second hijrah. And from this, the fuqaha have taken many rulings regarding sujood at Tilawat. But this is the first sajda of 14 that is found in the Quran. This is the first one that was revealed. In some madhahib is 15. And we will mention some of the details of these later on, inshaAllah ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He teach us of the Quran what we are ignorant of, and that He subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us wisdom through what He teaches us of it. Wallahu a'lam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا.